Hey everyone, it's Matt from Zen Shop, and today I wanted to make a reaction video to Theo and his My Final Flutter video. It came as a recommendation from a chap called Finn on the Railway Discord that I'm quite a frequent chatter on the Railway Discord. It's a great platform for building your app, and it's also the platform that I use to build all the infrastructure behind Zen Shop. So in case you haven't seen any of my previous videos, I'm Matt. I'm a founder of a startup called ZenShop. It's a help desk software, particularly useful for if you're running a Shopify store. And from the dev context of things, I built the app as a solo founder. I think it took me about a year in total to get most of this code done. And it uses Flutter. So I use Flutter for all the front end. We ship on 5 different platforms: Windows, macOS, web, iOS and Android, single code base. And I've had a really good experience personally with Flutter building this app as a solo founder. So I wouldn't also say I'm evangelical about Flutter, although weirdly I feel like I'm slowly becoming a little bit evangelical. I think the reason why I'm positive about Flutter is I've had a great experience with it myself. I want to share it with other people, make sure that they might consider Flutter for their projects, because it's a great option, honestly, and it's a solid foundation, I think, for building really cool applications. So I watched this video yesterday, and I didn't know Theo's channel before this. I think he's got fantastic hair. He looks really, really knowledgeable about lots of subjects. But I sort of disagreed, obviously, a little bit with his assessment of why you would potentially use Flutter. And I think he kind of ignores certain use cases around it, which are to Flutter's strengths, whereas React Native and things might struggle with this. So I'm going to play his video, and I'm going to react to certain things a little bit. And at the end, I'm going to give you a sort of little tour of what ZenShop is, in case you haven't seen it. I'll sort of bring on the desktop app, and I'll talk about why Flutter is a really good option for you. So let's play the video, shall we?
You triggered me. People keep asking me about building apps in video game engines. I said I wouldn't talk about Flutter anymore, but I want to put this one down for good. Stop writing your apps in game engines. Let's talk about what I mean here and think through what an app even is, because I feel like most of the time people talk about Flutter, they're failing to understand what Flutter is, what problems it solves, and what an application even is in the first place. I'm trying to define this as a spectrum. The way I think about this is left to right here, we have doesn't need native stuff. And on the right, we have does need native stuff. Think cameras, accelerometers, push notifications, all the native features that your phone or whatever platform offers to the developer. So if you're just making a checkout for your Amazon grocery app, you probably don't need many of these native features, if any at all. But if you are making a camera app or an AR app, you probably need a lot more of these features. From bottom to top,
I absolutely think that's completely fair, honestly. It's often what I thought myself when building apps. There's a lot of apps out there that just want to be an app and use the wrong technology. So if you don't need native stuff, go for the web. It's probably the quickest, easiest way to put stuff out there. You don't have to go through an app store as well, which is a big win. So if you don't need native stuff, don't use native technology. Makes sense.
Of the video game spectrum, where on the bottom here is no animation, everything's static, but on the top here, everything is animated. You're writing custom animation logic for individual details to make a really good interactive experience, probably a video game. One interesting project every application can be put somewhere on this chart. If we take something like Pokemon Go, for example, it's an interesting spot because Pokemon Go is very animated and interactive because it's a literal video game, but it also needs a lot of native stuff because it has so many native features built in, like using the accelerometer for figuring out what Pokemon you're looking at, all the fancy AR stuff, the GPS stuff, push notifications. There's a lot going on in Pokemon Go that is native characteristics that are necessary for the application to be a good experience. As such, there's a lot of work that has to be done for the developers to build good integrations with that native layer. They also have to build in a game engine if they want the animations and overall experience to be good at all. As such, I'm going to define a line here to make it a little easier to reason about these things. I'm going to call this a game engine line. This is the line where the thing you're making is animated enough that using an engine like Unity makes sense. The difference between something like Unity and a native platform like Kotlin or Swift or even React Native itself use the native primitives that the phone or whatever device is already providing. Apple provides a button in iOS that handles all of the accessibility, all of the screen reading stuff, all of the weird behaviors and touchability from different ways you can use an iPhone app. And their buttons are pretty good. I know, I click them all the time every day. Apple's button primitive is probably something we should use when we're building a phone app that has buttons and interactive features. But if we're mostly focused on the environment itself, the animated 3D experience, then Apple's stuff doesn't help us a whole.
Oh, I don't know, honestly. So I'm not a game developer. I've never built a game. So I can imagine building the game interface can be a little challenging. But often they're kind of relegated to sort of things around settings. So if you're like a mobile game, then I believe Unity probably has solved this for you, because it would be a very common problem. But you can eject out potentially to use native widgets, but I wouldn't say it's the first thing I would do, because it's going to be the hardest thing, mostly because it will then involve using native elements, which will duplicate your efforts across Android and iOS and Windows and macOS as well, if you're doing that. So using the game engine itself, and I'm sure Unity has a UI framework, might be the easiest thing to get going with first. And if your user interface is complex enough to need the native widgets, then use that.
We don't get much benefit from Apple having a really good screen-readable button. I need to render that button on a sign in a 3D world that I can walk up to and click. And that difference of the platform and the place the user experience lives being fundamentally different from the platform Apple built. That is where game engines come in. They say, screw all of your native stuff. We're not using any of that. We're going to use the processor, though. We're going to build our own rendering layer, our own engine for making things appear and disappear. It means it takes longer for these things to spin up, but it also means you can do much more. Which is why a game like Fortnite could never be written in React Native or native code. And it's why Unity and Unreal Engine have found the success they found by being a really good way for any developer to build a video game experience in an engine that can run against many different platforms. Somebody thought that was a good idea for applications. And this is where Flutter gets interesting. The thing I feel like many people miss about Flutter is that it's not a native platform. React Native renders a native button. It renders a native video player if you render a video player. It renders native things and calls native code. Flutter avoids doing that as much as it possibly can. Flutter is kind of like a web browser or a game engine for your apps, which means if you want one of those little toast notifications, like the pop-up that iOS gives you that says, hey, are you sure about this? Yes or no? Flutter can't let you do that. So instead of giving you an actual iOS feature, they literally take screenshots and stills of all of the different iOS features and bake them into the app bundle so that when you render on iOS, it will take that screenshot and overlay text on it. And the result is that every Flutter app has this terrible, uncanny...
Okay. Yeah, I'm not sure about where you got that from, the toast notifications on iOS, because you can definitely do notifications that don't involve any kind of screenshotting. He is correct, though, in the fact that Flutter isn't native, and it's a re-implementation of what iOS and Android widgets provide. So there is a degree of uncanny valley in the fact that the widgets kind of look 95% accurate, but you can actually do things like push notifications and so on fully natively with a platform view with Flutter. So that's an option for you. I personally do use that. I use Firebase to push notifications and get those little notifications coming into the app. And they look native because they kind of are. But for little like overlays and things as well, I can draw my own little animations and things in the app, and they look great.
Experience. You can feel it when you use a Flutter app. There are lots of simple, silly ways to check. Like if you use 2 fingers to scroll in Flutter, it scrolls twice as fast because they didn't implement their scroll layer correctly. Just stupid shit like that is the defining characteristic of Flutter.
Wow, I actually never knew that, honestly. We have an iOS app. I never really tried the 2-finger swiping, but that's interesting, actually. Yeah, unfortunately, but hopefully they fix that in that case.
Throwing away the entire native platform and the decades of hard work hundreds of thousands of developers have put into improving that native platform because you think your game engine is a better experience. So who is Flutter actually for? I am going to show you guys where I think Flutter's sweet spot is. I think there's a very thin space in this area here where if the application you're building isn't quite a game, but its defining characteristics are the animations, like an animation framework, Flutter can make a lot of sense. Rive is the new animation platform built with the goal of making performant animations easy to build. And because they're trying to make an animation layer that runs on every platform for these like cute graphic type animations with minimal interactions, Flutter makes a lot of sense for these types of cute things if you want to add a quick animation to an existing thing. Funny enough, they're not actually using Flutter in the runtime that you ship if you use it, but they're like a stripped down, Dart-based alternative that they're working on. But their actual editor experience is all based on Flutter. And I think this is that rare sweet spot where Flutter actually makes sense. Because the defining characteristic of this app isn't the interface, it's the interop between the interface and this animation framework. I was actually really surprised when I saw this project. It shocked me as though like, oh, wow, somebody found a real use for Flutter finally. But I cannot imagine anything above this line that isn't better suited to use a real game engine. And I certainly cannot imagine anything below this line that is better suited to that isn't better suited to use something like React Native. And if we
Okay, I'm gonna interrupt here. So Zenshop doesn't use many animations. In fact, I keep them very minimal. And for the main reason, honestly, is that like the app isn't about animations. It's about data, doing stuff, and being productive. So I want the app to be kind of fast and snappy, and animations kind of usually get in the way of that. And I also haven't found the animations in Flutter to be especially fast. And I think it's kind of known as well within the Flutter team because we've got things like Impeller, which are improvements to the rendering engine. So we've got Skier, which is the current version of Flutter's rendering system, and we're gonna have Impeller soon replace it. And Impeller is the new rendering engine, which will be faster and better. And they're trialing it currently on iOS, and it's also coming to macOS soon, and all the other platforms hopefully too. So animations are going to be improving. But I don't believe they're, as good as a game engine could be, or I think obviously native code might even be faster. And also my use case for Flutter has never been about its animations. It's actually been about the ability to build an application in a single code base using a language like Dart and a tool chain which is stable. Because I don't want to be dealing with native stuff through a JavaScript layer, which is kind of leaky. Because the trouble with React Native, it's a leaky abstraction. So what I often find is with a React Native type of project is it's fine if you're in the JavaScript world, but you're on that sort of thin ice between the JavaScript and then the native. And if you have any issues with that kind of layer, it's problems, build issues, incompatibilities, differences of behaviors as well. And of course, React Native has been used and improved on for many years now, so they've ironed out a lot of the issues, but I'm sure there's going to be new issues that pop up, especially with the maintainability of your app as well. So when I came and I looked at Flutter, I saw a platform which is being built very cohesively. The way the whole dependency system works with pub-get, it's very easy to add dependencies to a project, and then they will run normally with a fully native Dart code. And it's only really when you get into the platform aspects, like maybe push notifications or deep links or file access or those kinds of things, where you have to make modifications to your projects, different platforms to do things as per the platform needs. But on the most part, I'm simply dealing with dark code, and I really like that about Flutter. And it's made it possible for me to build apps that work not just on the mobile, but also on desktop, which is where most of my users find the value of my product. So it's a very desktop-heavy app, and I'm improving the desktop app in step, though, with my mobile app, which is super cool because I've got a single code base, and if I add changes to my desktop app, I can add it into my mobile app very easily. And I'm going to show you that in a minute as well. So let's play the videos a bit more.
This like more split, or like here we'll say at this point, and no, I don't want to define the specific features where these lines get crossed. But let's say from here, any point past this is web is fine. But let's say you have a mobile website. It's pretty good. It's doing everything you need. But now you need push notifications. Or you have users that specifically have the habit of checking an application. You want to quickly build an app for them. I don't think rushing to React Native and certainly not rushing to Flutter is the right call here. I think there's a lot of space, I'd argue almost like here, where web wrappers are fine. We can argue about where this line goes. It's all subjective, and I don't really care to argue it. The goal of this line is specifically to highlight that there's an area here where you have one or two features that aren't possible from the web, that you need to have a good experience for your users. I think this sweet spot here, especially if you're not going too crazy with the animation stuff, like this area here, is very compelling for a platform like Ionic. The benefit of Ionic is you get to write a website effectively using React components, all the stuff you normally do, and it is rendering in a web shell. But it gives you access to certain native features like push notifications, like the camera, without leaving the web platform. So you still get all your usual CSS, all the usual things. It's not a native app. Like anything before this line isn't going to be a native app if it's ideal. But at a certain point, you're building enough native stuff that it becomes irresponsible to not make the move. Thankfully, the vast, vast majority of what is doable on native platforms is doable through React Native. So I'll call this the React Native line. The goal of this line is to highlight that there's a huge area here where your functionality for your application might be more complex than what the needs of your application might require things that aren't part of Ionic's layer or web wrappers. Let's say you're building an alternative Spotify or Apple Music listening experience on native. You need to call the native SDKs to play those things. Ionic might have some bindings for that, but it's way easier to work with a platform like React Native that gives you a much stronger binding layer and also has a community with hundreds upon hundreds of packages that interop with those native layers so powerfully. One of the biggest things I feel like doesn't get enough attention in the React Native world is not quite React Native. It's the insane amount of packages that Expo has published to make React Native development easier. All of these are native bindings to both iOS and Android and often other platforms as well, where here, like Expo Font lets you load third-party fonts in your native app.
Yeah. So, like, I think one thing Theo is sort of drawing attention to is Android and iOS, but he's kind of ignoring other platforms too. What about Linux and Windows and Mac OS, and of course the web, right? So if your app is running on more than just iOS and Android, I think this is where React Native doesn't really offer you many options. So I did a bit of research on this though, and I did see that Microsoft has a fork of React Native that brings support to Windows as well as Mac OS. So it is possible to build a React Native app that works on 4 different platforms. The only issue is, though, when it comes to web as well. So in that case, you need to use something called React Native Web. But then you're limited to only JavaScript compatible components. So what I would really like to know, honestly, if anyone could tell me, is who's built an app that works on 5 different platforms with React Native in a single code base. Because if that's possible, then, hats off to them. And also, it's brilliant, fantastic. But I don't honestly think it's very easy. It doesn't sound to me very easy. And this is what put me off React Native, honestly, compared to Flutter. because Flutter is built from the get-go, as a source of a single code base that can run on all those different platforms with very minimal, input from you as a developer to make those changes. And it's first-party support, so I'm not using a fork of React Native to get that feature. It's fully supported by Flutter from the get-go.
In the native platform. Expo file system lets you access the native file system directly. Expo dev menu is more for like dev stuff. Expo crypto lets you do encryption using the native encryption and cryptography layers on both platforms. Expo context gives you direct access to contacts. These aren't things that are rendering in JavaScript. These are very specifically native bindings that you call in JavaScript and then you use to call things. I can't remember this. JavaScript isn't used to render things or do things in React Native. It's used to tell the native parts what to do. So the Expo image picker for example, will tell the native layer, hey, open the native image picker. And then when the native image picker is done picking, it sends it to JavaScript that says, oh, hey, we have images now. We should do something with them. We're going to send this to the native render layer to show you the images. All React Native really does is tells the native layer what to put where. It's not that big of an abstraction, and more calling things from native in React Native is getting easier. They're doing some really crazy work with the bridge between the two to effectively let you write Swift code and then call it in JavaScript with almost no latency. If you do the same thing in Flutter, you're going to be reinventing a lot of the patterns. Like the equivalent image picker in Flutter doesn't use the native image picker. It renders its own chaotic, weird Flutter thing that is sideloading the images that it read from FS to try and render its own alternative view. Whenever Flutter offers UI that is similar to the native platform, it is explicitly not using the native platform. They are effectively, I've said this before.
Okay, gotta pause this. Actually, file picking is one of the things that I had to encounter with ZenShop. So I'm going to just interject here and bring up ZenShop for you. Hold on. So this is ZenShop running in the web on a demo store. And you can obviously see it displaying messages and conversations and so on. And part of the onboarding experience is to set a profile picture. Okay, so I can actually go to that, even though if you just type in the URL, it will then take you to this page, which is the new user onboarding. And of course, this user is already set up, so it's not necessary. But here, for example, we've got this avatar where you can upload a photo, and so I can pick a picture and upload it, and that's done entirely through the Dart interface. It's not, in fact, well, it's calling into the native file picker. So this will look different on Windows, and it will use the Windows picker. And in the case of iOS and Android, it also uses the picker for that too. So I haven't had many issues with it. The only issue I did encounter though was I wanted to do some compression of the picture, right? Because I didn't want people uploading large pictures to their profile picture. It didn't make sense, right? And I did find that the web version of the file compression was very slow. It was slowing down the browser, and I think that's due to the fact that it was using something that wasn't very optimal for file compression, and that was a shame. So I had to limit the uploads to like a megabyte, and then hope the user has a picture which they wasn't so big. But other than that, file picking has not been an issue. So I've been happy with that with Flutter. All right, let's go back to the video.
Screenshotting the native features, ripping out the identifiable elements, and then running text generation on top to make it look close enough to real. It's not a real application platform, and it is not a native platform. The most insulting thing for me is that the people who complain about React Native and shill Flutter complain about React Native for problems that only exist in Flutter. Flutter is not a native platform. People are mad at React Native because it's running code that isn't native on the platform, so they just abstract the whole platform away entirely? Makes no sense. The vast majority of people who regularly shill Flutter in my replies and in my community are just doing it because it's the thing they picked. And when I ask them to justify it, they say, well, it's cross-platform. Like, okay, and one of those platforms barely even works. Do you know the state of iOS Flutter right now? Do y'all understand how awful the animation layer currently is in Flutter for iOS? Did you see the jank there? Are you joking? This has been the case since iOS moved to Metal as the default engine. And the issue for this, as far as I know, is still open. Yep, this is still broken. And we've been promised a solution now. You have to use Flutter's engine if you're using Flutter. If there was a bug like this in React Native, you can just drop React Native and write it in native and just call the native thing. Flutter makes that nearly impossible because they're so far abstracted from the platform. It's insanity. We're not even talking about the website. We haven't even talked about code push. Like two of the biggest features that make React Native powerful, which is the interop.
Okay, yeah. So he's got a good point about code push. Flutter doesn't have code push. It's been a bit of a pain for me as a startup because I would like to be able to push more updates quicker to users. However, it is ameliorated to quite a high degree because App Store review times have really improved. So if I do need to push an update to users, then it'll take about a day, to get things done. I find the Microsoft App Store a little bit more difficult with that because it doesn't often do reviews on the weekends. But Apple is actually one of the best ones for getting the review times really quick, I find. They will often do it within 24 hours, get the app approved. So, yeah, if you really do need to put lots and lots of updates very quickly to users, and you don't want to be impacted by the sort of 24-hour wait time, then Flutter at the moment is difficult to defend. There is a project called Shorebird, which I'm really, really looking forward to. Hopefully they fix this for us, because the goal of Shorebird is to bring code push to Flutter. And I follow their Discord. It's done by some really amazing developers. I can see what they're doing, and they're doing a great job. But it does seem like a real challenge. So I think one of the issues that stood out to me was it works good on Android. So if you want to do code push on Android, fine, with Shorebird. But with iOS, there's like a 10x performance hit. So, maybe iOS is already slower than its Android version. So if it's going to be 10 times slower, that's a bit of an issue. So I'm not using Shorebird yet because I need to be pretty sure that it's not going to downgrade the performance already. But hopefully, this is a challenge which is fixed in future, and if it does, that's great for Flutter. And I'm really hoping Shorebird team are able to make code push possible for Flutter.
Mindset between web and mobile, and theoretically the interop of code as well. Not the biggest fan of React Native for web, but it's a decent enough solution. People have shipped really cool things with it. But also, when you're trying to actually ship updates to your application, the abstraction that React Native gives you lets you ship a fresh JavaScript bundle that triggers different native code without having to go through the App Store. Obviously, if you ship new features this way, Apple's going to block you. But if you use this for bug fixes and small changes that don't matter that much, you are no longer blocked by the App Store on every single small thing you need to do for your users. And dumb stuff like having an April Fool's Day theme, or like a random 4th of July type theme, or whatever the hell you want to do for a one-off feature. You book this event and you want to pin it to the top of your app. You can now do that with code push and with over-the-air updates trivially in React Native land. It is such a huge advantage.
Yeah, I guess so. You could do it with code push, but in my case, if I was doing a April Fool's Day kind of theme or Christmas theme maybe, or something, I might plan ahead a little bit, and I would think about what could we do for Christmas, and make the app cool, and we could have a feature flag, so there could be a little flag in the app. It says, okay, on when we enable this flag from the back end somewhere, then this feature turns on, and that would then solve this issue of not being able to do code push. So yeah, like if you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Why not consider other options in that case, and maybe feature flags would be an alternative for you.
Just throw away. I don't know why you would do it. The reason I hate talking about Flutter is all of these things are objectively true. And every time I argue about Flutter, somebody picks a random one of these things to get really huffy about and find some edge case about. And I'm like, okay, but what about the other two? And they say, oh no, those don't matter. We're just talking about this thing. All three of these things make Flutter basically unusable unless you have very, very specific requirements that both aren't affected by these negatives and also benefit from having a game engine that your application runs in. Realistically speaking, if you weren't considering Unity at some point, you shouldn't be considering Flutter at all. And this is what kills me with Flutter, is people building like e-commerce apps in Flutter. You're hurting your users, you're hurting your engineers, you're hurting yourself.
Oh my gosh. Well, I mean, technically I'm an e-commerce kind of product. Kind of funny actually. Yeah, so I really hope Shopify actually get involved with Flutter. I know they've been supporters of React Native in the past, but shout out to Shopify. Build some cool e-commerce stuff with Flutter. That would be awesome. I'm going to show you some of what I do already in Flutter. Maybe it will inspire you.
Please stop doing it. Yeah, I think React Native with Expo is as good as you can get for multi-platform mobile right now. It's really hard to beat. I've said everything I've had to say about Flutter. I'm tired of people picking tech because it's the thing they like and use, and they haven't thought through what the impact would be. There are times I would use Flutter if I was working on an animation library, and there are times I would write Swift if I was working on a camera app. I feel like the Flutter people feel like Flutter should be this entire chart, and when I challenge them on that, they just shit themselves constantly. It is genuinely...
Oh yeah, genuinely, like if you're building a camera app, I'm not really sure Flutter is probably the best option for you, just because like cameras, videography, all that stuff, probably better done with like a native app. Yeah.
Really, really hard to have conversations about Flutter because the average Flutter fanboy is a new developer, which is probably my least favorite part, is the people who are getting hurt.
Oh my God. Well, yeah, I'm an old new developer in that case. I'm feeling graybeard.
Most by Flutter are new devs just looking for the first horse to bet on. And it really, really sucks for them because they're betting on a horse that's effectively gimped from the start. It really, really sucks. And I hope that we can be more responsible as we talk about these technologies, because I just don't think there's much room here and that there's much being built in this space. And again, to this day, I have seen a singular application that Flutter made sense for. But when I talk to Flutter engineers, their response is there is no application React Native makes sense for. As such, I think there's a conversation to be had here. Shout out to Luke, the one person from...
Okay, so personally, I've got nothing but respect for the React Native team and anyone who uses React Native find it useful for their product. So I'm not a fanboy, and I'm not going to stop anyone from using React Native because why not, you know? But yeah, like I also feel like Flutter is pretty awesome, and I built my app with Flutter. So I'm going to show you now ZenShop. I'm going to minimize this, and here we go. So here is ZenShop. There we go. So you can see it's currently I'm rendering it for Mac OS. Now, just to preface this, it also works on Windows. And the difference with the Windows app is it will show the Windows buttons here, and these will kind of move along a bit. And obviously these Windows buttons disappear. But for all intents and purposes, except for like file pickers and everything like that, the Windows app and the Mac OS app look the same. And we've also got it for iOS. So I'm going to bring up the iOS simulator. That will load. That will take a minute to load. So let's get that going. And I also showed it earlier. I think we've got it running on the web. So if I go to the web, there we go. So this is the web version of Flutter. I can close that now. So yeah, like they're very similar, right? You know, if you bring these apps overlaid, here we go. So some of the cool stuff is, you know, obviously with the native app is you get some cool stuff with the blurry effect. So I can't do that with the web app because I don't think web browsers support that yet. But with the Mac OS app and the Windows app, I can blur. So I really like that. There's also some benefits to, but depending on which browser you're in. So Flutter apps, Flutter web apps support progressive web app technology. So if I was using Chrome, I could, or Edge, and I think even in macOS Sonoma, the Flutter web experience is better, because rather than seeing this title bar here at the top and all the web browsery stuff, that can go away, and you get like a very app-like feel. But one of the things I like about using the Mac OS and Windows app is it just looks very much like how you would expect a desktop app to look. And as I move around the app, it's responsive and quick. Some of the loading here of the timeline is a little bit slow because of performance on the API at the moment, but I'm working and improving that. But that's not Flutter's fault. That's more of my API. What's cool is this is also an e-commerce app, by the way. So I show stuff like customer data. Here we go. So we've got customer data here. We talk about their orders and the payment status and so on. This is all fake data, by the way. So there's nothing really interesting here for you. But here's the order information too. And what else? We've got interesting things as well related to animations. So you can see here, for example, this is an animation. Pops in pretty quick. It's okay. We've got a little pop-up here. We've got alerts, I think, somewhere. Let me think. Where could I do this? Oh yeah, here. I think I could change the order. So for example, I can click on one of these, and then it pops up this alert. So I've used the macOS UI library for building some of the desktop features. And here's the app on iOS. I think I probably need to build it because I haven't built it for a while in iOS. In fact, oh gosh, no, I can't show you that right now because the build is probably broken on iOS. Well, another video. Or you can refer back to some of my other videos. But yeah, like, so what can I say? I don't know, honestly. Like, I can't see many reasons why I've struggled with Flutter or the concerns that Theo was raising about it being bad. And from what I see about React Native is it wouldn't ever be able to be a good choice for me or ZenShop because of its like relatively immature state of desktop support and also web support. So the first case that people experience my app is through the web. They're going to install it from the Shopify App Store. So you can go here, for example, apps, Shopify. Here we go. I'll just show you quickly. This is kind of the standard route. So we type in ZenShop, find it here. So we're on the Shopify App Store. People install ZenShop to their e-commerce store, and this goes through a process of OAuth, and then the OAuth process calls back into the web app. So basically, because of course they wouldn't have installed the actual apps for ZenShop, they're going to install the Shopify app. And then it goes into the web app. So, for example, you can click on the demo store here, and this will show you a preview of what ZenShop would look like for you before you've installed it. And you can click around as if you were support staff. And that alone is just fantastic, right? Like that's what Flutter gives me. It gives me the ability to create these apps seamlessly across so many different platforms. And I really, really think people need to think outside of probably like the mobile niche, because I definitely think like as a mobile developer I spent about 10 years building apps in Swift particularly, and Objective-C in the early days. And there was so much focus on being like mobile first. But I think nowadays, web is just as important as your mobile app. It's highly important to have a mobile responsive landing page and marketing material, and you want people to, because people are going to see it on the phone just as much on the desktop, if not more. But you can't just have this idea that mobile apps are the only thing that customers want. They probably also want good web apps and good desktop apps as much as they want good mobile apps. And this is where Flutter can help you, because it can build that all in one code base. So that is my summary. And also, if you want to follow along my path as a solo founder, please subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching. See you soon. Bye.